Literally, like I'll walk you through exactly the process. I will go into something like Emotion and start to build out a report. I will look at a report of my top ads over the last X amount of time. Call it 300, give it a year. If you have a lot more data than that, you can go further back and you'll say, I'm going to watch them and I'm going to start to categorize those things into pillars, right? We have a brand that sells diffusers. Like they're thoughtful. They're really nice diffusers. Like the ones that make your house smell nice. And there are three things that they care about or want to talk about are kind of like the clean and safe angle. Like it's better for your pets and your family, right? So that's pillar number one. Pillar number two is like the device performance. Like it's just better than anything else you can buy because they've spent a lot of time engineering this thing. And three is like the fragrance experience. So like, what does it actually smell like? How does it make you feel? Because scent can trigger emotion, things like that. So when I look in their ad account over the last year, I start to go organize, okay, this ad is in this pillar. I just organize it. If you have naming conventions set up, it's probably a lot easier to do this. But if you don't, in the meantime, you're going backwards, you organize them into a pillars report. You look at that report and you say, great, most of my spend is going into this pillar and my efficiency is substantially better than the other two. And now I can say, what do I do next? Well, then you can go within, let's call it clean and safe. Let's say the clean and safe is the top spending one. You go into that report, you build an additional report for all those ads, and you just look at them. Visually, Motion gives you those nice little cards where you can just look at them and you could say, what is missing? And if you look at them and you say, I'm only running statics and they're comparison ads, you're like, oh shit, I probably need to switch this up and I need to consider doing something else.
And now, let's take a listen to the Scalability School podcast.
Welcome to episode 3 of the Scalability School podcast. So glad to be with you. Andrew Foxwell here with Brad and Zach. What's up, fellas?
Living the dream.
We're doing. We are stoked to talk about creative diversity today. So what the hell is it? How do you actually put it into practice? How do you save money by, knowing what it is and not giving up on things too quickly? We love saving money. There's so much discussion about this of what it even is and everything. So that's what we're going to get into today. Brad has a lot of run through of like his systems. And we're going to get into that specifically. And we're going to get into, talking about basically the framework that he uses and utilizes for this. So go ahead, Brad, let's get started.
Yeah, and I gave a fair warning to the guys before we jumped into this. It's like, I'm going to talk a lot and probably really fast. So if I need to slow down, they're just going to interrupt me and ask questions to try and dig deeper into this. So we're calling this episode the What the Hell is Creative Diversity? Because as I scroll Twitter, as I look in the Foxwell Founders Group, and as I look across D2C, the D2C landscape, I think there's a lot of discussion around what creative diversity is, how to measure it, how to get it. Because I think oftentimes people feel like strategy from a creative standpoint is just like throwing things at the wall, hoping something sticks, and then trying to do more of that thing. And there's not like a system in order to get to that. So what I did is I looked across what we do from an agency standpoint and what I know Zach's doing on the brand side, what they do at Homestead, and just kind of put together this process that hopefully you can just copy. I think the first thing to consider when we talk about creative diversity is that if we just let ourselves go and try to produce content, we're really not going to know where to start. And so I think something to keep in mind throughout this entire topic is that constraints can help breed creativity and focus. Meaning, like if you can do everything, like we're selling socks, we're helping Zach sell socks here. There's a lot of things you can talk about. There's a lot of benefits to the socks. There's a lot of reasons they're better than others. There's a million different things you can talk about. And so you want to help define what you should be talking about by using constraints. And then you can kind of work within the constraints and start to like check the box on testing things. Because I think that's another thing people struggle with is they don't like force themselves to check the box on things that they've tested. So they never know, did this work or did this didn't work? And I just, it's back to the spaghetti at the wall, hoping something sticks.
One thing I have for you, so constraints, I think the first thing I think of when you say constraints is volume, not even just anything else. So I think I'm curious how you think about volume. Maybe just give a couple examples of like, hey, you're a brand spending this much per month on meta ads. Again, this podcast isn't just meta ads, but like it's what majority of these direct consumer brands all the way to 9-figure brands are mostly caring about. It's the big thing that, the big channel that, covers the most spread of ad budget. So anyways, I'm curious how you think about that. Like,
Yeah, that's a constraints. That's a great way to think about it. It's not initially what I had in mind, but it's a big piece of it. So I'm glad you said that. My initial thought for constraints is like, what are we talking about here? And like, do I have at least some kind of amount of evidence for like why I'm talking about that in the ads? Like, what is the positioning of the ads? We'll talk through all that in a bit. What is it, an image? Is it a video? Like those kinds of constraints. But I think the quantity of it helps refine it even further because it's, if you know that your team can pump out 50 ads, we'll not worry about the specifics between videos and images at this point in a month, then you have to work back from that number. I think it's really helpful to be able to work back from that number. So to give you some examples.
totally that, or if you hire an agency, right? Because most of the time an agency will be on a set scope, or at least you should be asking your agencies, hey, like what can I expect kind of roughly per month based on what I'm spending, what we're paying you per month.
It's a great point. And I think our kind of like average benchmark on our end is like 2 to 3 projects per week per client. And that's just like at a baseline until we start to get into the higher spend levels. And project can be defined by a lot of different things, which I don't know if we need to go into right now, but it's effectively like project equals a brief. Within a brief, it could contain different videos and images and things like that. So I think, you kind of have to set that benchmark for yourself, and you can kind of go into your ad account, look at what you're spending on a monthly basis, figure out how many ads you needed in order to get to that level of spend. And like the simple version of that is if you want to double your spend, okay, double the amount of ads you have going in the ad account for now, and then you can revise that as you go. That's a simple way to think about it for the time being. So I think as we get to setting up the constraints outside of the number part that we just talked about, I want to take you through the process of what we do to onboard clients, because I think it helps set up those constraints. So high level review of what we do when we get our hands on everything is we go look at competitors. We go read all the reviews, and you can use ChatGPT to help you with that, and we can get more specific if you want. Go into the ad account, watch all of the ads, particularly sorting by top spending, and go get a sense of what's working there. Jot down notes. From the reviews in the ad account, you build out these target personas. Who's responding to ads right now? What do they care about? And kind of building out this map, which ultimately becomes a content map for us, which shows pillars and angles.
Target personas, like explain that more. Because I think a lot of people are like, I know who buys my products, but do they really? I think is like the main thing that I push back on. I'd say like a lot of our customers, even for the brands that I own, sometimes we're like, this is who we think is buying our product, but who actually is. So how do you think about target personas? How do you set them? Obviously, it's probably unique by brand based on what the product is, how many SKUs they're selling, but like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, the more SKUs, the infinitely more complex it gets because you can very easily have different products or different people responding to different products. So what we try to do is we go look at the reviews and we'll sort them by persona. We're like we'll look at them all and then group them into what are the common things that pop up, and that'll kind of help us define like what does this person care about.
How would you look at that if you go look at Hollow? How would you consider that?
Yeah, I've got another brand in mind. So like we have like a novelty gifting product that we own, and so on that specific point, we'll organize it into different types of like gift givers. So it can be for dad, for the person in their life, for mom. Like the intent of how they're buying is one of the ways that we'll do it. You can also go use case. So for Hollow, it can very easily be like hunters versus just like general outdoorsy people or people that are hiking. Or I think maybe you guys are getting into some other categories within that now. You just launched a new website and you can go see all the personas on the website very thoughtfully. So I think there's like intended use cases is an interesting way to think about it. You can break it down a little bit further and like go into like the psychographic information, like why are they buying? What does it mean to them? All that different stuff. But I think it kind of just starts with going to the reviews, seeing what's most commonly popping up, going to the ad delivery looks like, because I think oftentimes clients are surprised because they've never actually broken down the ad spend before. One example, we had a client that sold body wash, and they were surprised by the fact that it was like older women buying the product because they were like, oh, this is for dudes. Like I'm selling to dudes. And it's like, well, you are, but there's a different person buying this. So I think there's a bunch of different ways to like get to personas. Reviews in the ad account are like existing evidence that you have today. You can start to branch out from there, but like you got to start with what's available to you using the data that you have. So that's how we do that. And then you take those personas, and that's where you can kind of build out this content map, which is where you start to say, what do these people care about? So within the context of hunters, right? We'll go back to Hollow as an example. A pillar would be the core message of the thing that the hunter cares about, which is it keeps their feet warm when it's cold outside, right? Like that's one of the core things you could say. And within that, you can probably define that pillar in a bunch of different ways from an angle perspective. So it's the fact that it's moisture wicking, which helps pull it away from your feet so it keeps your feet warm. It's just made out of something different. So that alpaca fur is better than cotton or wool, which people are normally used to using. So it's and pillars and angles can manifest themselves in a bunch of different ways. Another way to think about this from like an apparel perspective, from a pillar core messaging is like the usability, generally speaking, is a pillar, right? Like if you make a functional apparel product, the usability of that is a way to think about the pillar. And then, maybe the aesthetic is another one to think about.
Right.
And then you tier down into those angles from there.
What I would say, what I've heard in creative diversity and what the Foxwell, GPT just pulled out, in terms of looking at creative diversity is looking at the difference across 4 major dimensions, which is one, conceptual angle, problem solution, emotional trigger, product benefit highlight, aspirational identity, and then visual format. So UGC testimonial, that's obviously one of them. The difference in pacing and style, is it rapidly cut? Is it slow build? And is it offer call to action variants? So price drop, bundle and save, free gift with purchase, whatever. The check that it came up with, which is, I think a conversion of a lot of ideas that came up with this, which is if I showed these to 5 different types of customers, would each one resonate with a different ad? If yes, you have creative diversity. And if no, you're iterating, not diversifying. So it kind of goes with what you're saying in terms of you start with looking at the competitors, just at a baseline, looking at the competitors, looking at the reviews, what they've got. You're looking at target personas, which initially is like, yes, database, but also some like gut feeling of like, okay, these are our people. And then you're building out this content map with pillars and angles. So the pillars and angles, we kind of got into it. You start to get into the format and the type. The question I've always had when you start doing this is like, if you're doing this on your own, how do you start to organize this? Like, how do you start to not go insane with wanting to create like a billion ads all the time, right?
That's a really good question. And I think that's where we go back to the idea of constraints. And so the way that we think about it is, let's put together a monthly plan for what we want to talk about. So if you're spending any amount of money on ads right now, you have some idea of what is working from a messaging standpoint. So maybe we'll just keep going back to Hollow as an example. Like Zach, I think one of the first things that you guys, or one of the things that you discovered that really helped unlock some additional scale is that like hunters really liked the product. And so let's say you're looking at this and you're trying to come up with a plan for what do I do next from a creative perspective. You say over the next 30 days, I'm going to focus all of my effort on hunters. Like I'm going to do nothing else except for focus on hunters and building ads for those specific people. We can talk about when to consider pivoting away. I think that's a question that I'll have in a bit. But you just kind of set up this plan to focus on hunters, and that is the initial constraint.
So yeah, the constraint is I'm going to pick one target persona for the first month. Let's just stick to it by a month, and then let's figure out like what my output is. Maybe that's 50 creatives that go out, and maybe that's 10 videos and 40 statics, just because images are easier to make and videos are a bit harder. Cool. That makes perfect sense. And then is the thought there that you're basically picking a new persona every month, or are you iterating on that persona? I think you should get into like when to move. I know I'm making you go ahead of what you were planning to, but like, let's talk about like when to think about looking at a different pillar. When do I actually consider that? Because I think that's where a lot of brands that are small, that are maybe spending $1,000 a day or less, are like trying to do too many things, very likely, right? Their ad dollars are being spread too thin.
I think if you're spending $1,000 to $3,000 a day, like you probably shouldn't pivot away. Like if it's working, let's say it's working, you're really happy with the performance, or you're close to being really pumped about where it's at. You're within 10 to 20% of your efficiency goals, or you're smashing them. And you're just like, I can't spend more. I'm stuck here. You probably don't want to pivot away from that. It's just like you're not spending enough to have saturated that specific thing that you're talking about, hunters in this case. And so the way that you could think about it is like, okay, I probably shouldn't pivot away from like a default perspective unless it's not working. If you have some evidence of success, I think the way that you can consider pivoting away is like, I'm going to spend 70% of my we just define capacity, right? You said 20 images, 10 videos or something, or 40 images, 10 videos. you could say 70% of that is going to be focused on hunters and 30% is going to be shot in the moon at other things that we have some evidence of success for. We see people hiking in these in reviews. We're gonna take 30% of it and focus on that group of people.
Yeah, I think like the biggest thing for us was, and we've realized this after seeing so many brands come through Homestead and then like now doing it ourselves, is that you can very likely push up way more than what you actually think you can. Obviously TAM dependent, but like most brands can spend, you know, call it 100K a month easily on one target persona and just like drilling into new pillars, which are these like different angles, different, you know. So we have this idea of, all right, so you have your target persona that you're going to pick. You have the rough angles that you might go after, like we've talked about this hunting thing, for example. It could be whatever, right? Like we can start using another brand besides Hollow for future like examples, but now what? Now what's next? Like what is next now? How do I choose images, videos? How do I choose UGC versus statics versus GPT images? Like how do I think about what to do next?
Yeah, I think it helps. I'm assuming that everybody listening to this, for the most part, has spent more than $0 in their ad account, right? So I think what they can do is literally, like, I'll walk you through exactly the process. I will go into something like Emotion and start to build out a report. I will look at a report of my top ads over the last X amount of time. Call it 300. Give it a year. If you have a lot more data than that, you can go further back, and you'll say, I'm going to watch them and I'm going to start to categorize those things into pillars, right? So once I have, and maybe it's at some point we can show examples of what these reports look like, because it might be a little bit hard to visualize. But we have a brand that sells diffusers. Like they're thoughtful. They're really nice diffusers, like the ones that make your house smell nice. And there are three things that they care about or want to talk about are kind of like the clean and safe angle. Like it's better for your pets and your family, right? So that's pillar number one. Pillar number two is like the device performance. Like it's just better than anything else you can buy because they've spent a lot of time engineering this thing. And three is like the fragrance experience. So like, what does it actually smell like? How does it make you feel? Because scent can trigger emotion, things like that. So those are the three things that they care about. So when I look in their ad account over the last year, I start to go organize, okay, this ad is in this pillar, I just organize it. If you have naming conventions set up, it's probably a lot easier to do this. But if you don't, in the meantime, you're going backwards, you organize them into a pillars report. You look at that report and you say, great, most of my spend is going into this pillar and my efficiency is substantially better than the other two, which is exactly what happened in this case. And now I can say, what do I do next? Well, then you can go within, let's call it clean and safe. Let's say the clean and safe is the top spending one. You go into that report, you build an additional report for all those ads, and you just look at them. Visually, Motion gives you those nice little cards, so you can just look at them and you could say, what is missing? And if you look at them and you say, I'm only running statics and they're comparison ads, you're like, oh shit, I probably need to switch this up and I need to consider doing something else. So I'll pause there for a second because I will ramble.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's great. I'm right now, I'm looking at Hollow's ads last 90 report in Motion top creatives, which are like the ads spent a minimum of $500 and it has at least a ROAS of a 1-day click of 1.5 or higher. And yeah, I mean, it's very clear that there's moments that we hit even ourselves where it's like all these ads look very similar. They do not look like different ads. And I think that one thing that people like David Herman has talked about on Twitter and other like really smart marketers have talked about is like, does the ad look and feel different? And if it doesn't truly look and feel different, Meta will treat it the same as another ad that looks damn near the same.
Yeah, that's so true.
I think that this is where like the idea of iterating versus taking new swings at creative is just so is so important to actually breaking through. So to your example, like this diffuser brand, clean and safe, like that's the angle we're going to go down. If all of them look like statics that have a post-it note on it that mentions a sale that are your top ads, probably time to try something different. That feels like a completely different hook, something that's more visual. Maybe you pull in a crazy GPT image background of something that just looks radically different from what you're testing, but obviously still staying in that same pillar, which is clean and safe. So trying headlines, trying stuff like that.
Brad, one thing, I guess there's two questions that I have. One is so much of the creative world and the knowledge that's around it that we hear, if you really talk to folks that are in the know, it goes back to talking about emotion is like a huge part of it and how you're triggering emotion. And I think you can go down that road and freak people out a lot as like one tactic. But then you also hear people talking about whitelisting, and as well as like another tactic, which is related, and like you could have whitelisting people, go towards emotion. But as you start to look at this, you're building out these reports, you're going through and looking at these things and diving in. How do you start to consider the consumer emotion around these, and like what percentage of the ads running across your accounts focuses on an emotional angle versus like us versus them, or another really common, like a founder video, that kind of stuff, right? Because I
Yeah.
feel like the way to unlock growth initially is obviously to consider creative diversity as the goal, and then to get into thinking about emotions, and then to diversify into using creators and things as well. So I'm curious, like across because ours is heavily in that regard. That's why I say that. And I think I've heard the same from founder members as well. So curious.
Yeah, no, we can stay on the same kind of diffuser example because I think that's a really good one from an emotional standpoint. So to back up for one moment, like when you start to build out these reports, what becomes really apparent is just like the gaps that exist, right? If you go look across your pillars and you have your top spending pillar has the fewest amount of ads for it, it's like, okay, well, the easy answer is I should just make more for that specific thing.
Right. I
Okay,
mean,
and then I
that's
can go
like
look.
what you showed us in that example of like you had the return on ad spend on this one. It was like you'd only created 6 concepts for it, but it was the best
Yeah,
return by a wide margin. Right. And
yeah.
motion makes that so easy to do that. Right. So anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly what I was going with that. So now when I see that, I see that there's a gap to be filled. I can go look, and again, using the examples, like let's say all of your ads are comparison ads, and that's worked really well. Well, maybe the next step is taking that and looking at the comparison ads and figuring out like what is the emotion that can be triggered from it. I don't know if I can give you an exact percentage, but like using the idea of clean and safe, it's like, well, if all your statics just say like safe scenting or like clean ingredients, like, okay, that's probably going to get people who are like in market. Maybe they're kind of comparing different options. But what it's not going to do is it's not going to convince the mom who is concerned about like their kid with asthma, like breathing in these heavy things, but they have dogs that are running around the house and making it smell like garbage, like, so I think that's where you can start to get into the storytelling. And I think that that's where you probably start to unlock those additional buckets of spend by creating ads that kind of speak to those different tiers of emotions. I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but kind of thinking about it.
I think Andrew brought up one thing that I think is really interesting when it comes to creative diversity. It's whitelisting. This is something like for my brands in our portfolio. We have a handful of clients that definitely put a lot of energy into it. I think it's super useful. But when it comes to creating ads that feel and look different, like hiring creators that are completely different people doing completely different things with your product or thinking about it completely differently, um, is a great way to do this. Also, like Meta sees it as a new handle, a new user. So like there's a good chance that while one of your consumers is scrolling through feed, they don't just see like your ad with like your brand title and then they see another one of your ads with the brand title. If you're running whitelisting, there's a good chance that they see like 1, 2, 3, 4 different creators while they're flipping through reels, while they're flipping through stories, while they're flipping through whatever, that are makes this like concept where it feels like everyone's talking about you. I think that is like such a unique way to go about this. I saw it, someone was talking about it on Twitter today. I think I forget who that was. Was his name Martin? Brad is saying
Marin.
you like the Marin. So shout out to Marin for saying that because I feel like that's the perfect way to describe this, where it's like it benefits Meta for the fact that all those ads feel different, but it also benefits your customer who is like, oh wow, there's like a bunch of different people talking about this product in potentially a different way. So
Yeah.
I think whitelisting is a great way to do that.
Marin, a great founder member for the record, and so on the note of going through and understanding that, I think a question that or another thing that I've heard that I'm curious if you guys have heard as well is Meta is actually pushing in all of their like summits and all this stuff, like whitelisting as a thing that needs to be like is going to be the unlock. So obviously they're going to make this easier, but also whenever Meta mentions something, it's like it gives you a little bit of algorithmic advantage. I feel like it's like they're saying this on purpose. Have you guys heard this as well? Or I mean, I heard it from some founder members, so I was curious.
Yeah, we have. I mean, from our reps, at least agency reps, yeah, I'm certain that the like Meta Performance Summit that's coming up here in June, that's going to be a big topic because it forces creative diversity, which is the whole other piece that they've been talking about, right? So yeah, I think it's a pretty big thing.
So Brad, on your looking at your system that you have, that okay, we're talking about why yours is great. So why does your creative diversity system and the way that you identify and work with it suck? Like, what are your gaps, and what are the people that are awesome that you admire? Like, let's talk about Jess from Fire Team, somebody that I deeply respect and think is like doing incredible work. Like, what are they doing that you're not?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if I'm gonna have a perfect answer, but my gut take is like I'm generally like a pretty analytical person, and when I'm looking at this from like a measured creative diversity perspective, what I'm trying to do is say, okay, we've got these are our pillars. Here's how much we quantity of ads spend into each of those things. Okay, within that, what are our angles and our personas? Within that, what is the content format? What is the type? Like I'm trying to literally put here's a quantity of ads and here's a quantity of dollars behind my creative diversity. And I think like there's like some vibes that I think Jess has from experience that you just like can't replicate. Now I know they're really smart and like
Yeah.
that's a little bit of a cop out, and I don't want to just like say talent because I know he's worked really hard to like get to where he's at with all that. But I'm very analytical and trying to like measure that. So I don't know exactly how to put my finger on it, but I think there's a little bit of sauce and
So,
vibe that
Yeah,
things
I
kind of
mean,
it's
so
have.
like
my personal feeling is that it's based on like the fact that they sit down for a long period of time to go into this, right? Like they sit down and they'll challenge. They're expensive because it's their people's time sitting there being like, "What do you think? Like, how are we going to dive into this?" Which is, I think, a lot of us, because of the nature of what we do, right? If you're a brand owner listening to this, like you only have so much time. So paying for that access of people that are going to really deeply study it and go into it with you, and obviously using their own proprietary methods to discover more creative diversity, I think is a really interesting point. And I think if we spent, the question is if we, with our clients, if I spent 15% more time doing this, would our ads be 15% better? Like, I think so. Right. So
probably,
I think
yeah.
it's a
I
function
think
of
they,
time.
yeah, they're just, I mean, we use the word intentional, and I feel like in these podcasts, it's just like a word that I keep referencing over and over again, but it's the truth of it, right? Is they're very intentional. They take a lot of time, and that breeds creativity. And when you have creativity, that's where like diversity comes out of, right? It's completely different ads that feel completely different back to back to back. Um, and it could be some crazy static headline with some like wild visual, and it could be as simple as like a piece of paper with like a little note on it that just is like the way that it's written really makes you pay attention to it. So yeah, I think they do. Definitely Fire Team does a great job of that. Um, what I want to get back to kind of like what we were talking about, Brad, which is kind of choosing like when to think of the next pillar. I know we kind of brought it up a little bit. So like one thing I wanted to share, which is like an example of Hollow, and then I'd love to hear how you've thought about this for other brands is like the hunter thing is seasonal for us, right? So when we started Hollow, we literally launched it in the fall. I launched it, basically took a bunch of pillars or a bunch of like potential, not pillars, but target personas, launched statics to figure out what one could maybe work. And that was the one that clicked. And so we doubled down on that, to your point. We got it up to like 10, 15K a day in spend. That was our first year. Then it was like, okay, we need to figure out how to sell these socks outside of Q4 to someone other than this demo that only buys this product mostly in the fall. I think there's a lot of brands that have seasonal products and stuff like that. So then it's like, okay, how do I think about other stuff? I mean, we basically went back to the same approach, which is what are the potential personas of people that could buy this product? And we always start with statics. Like that is like our bread and butter way to do it because I think you can like from a volume standpoint, from a diversity standpoint of statics, how they look, how they feel, headline testing, angle testing to your point. Like I guess I'm curious on, when are you telling brands, hey, this is the point. You've hit the point. Like let's go look for somebody else and like how do we get more scale out of this business? Because I think that's where a lot of people feel like they get stuck. Hey, I'm stuck doing 250K a month and I can't punch through and I don't know why I can't punch through. Usually I feel like it's a persona issue where they're just like stuck on trying to sell it to the same
100%
customer
agree.
saying the same exact
100% agree.
thing. So like how do you think about that?
It can be like really TAM dependent, as you kind of alluded to earlier. It also be like might be product mix dependent. Like you're not going to be able to make swimsuits pop in out of season unless you like you're using something that can help you sell in Australia and you know the other hemisphere. That said, like if you like consistently month after month, like 2 months in a row, you're like running your head against the wall and you like cannot you increase ad spend and efficiency just degrades. You increase ad spend, efficiency just degrades. Like it's probably time to like start to use that 30 to 50% of your creative projects like focused on something else.
And this is
so
like after you've already tried all the different types of ads. You're running statics, you're running founder videos, you're running UGC, you're running
yes,
whitelisting, you're running, all the gambits of different types of
you're doing
ads that
offer
you can put
testing, you're
out.
doing landing page testing within like
Yeah.
speaking to your hammering all of that. Yep.
So you've blown through that persona, you feel like you're not extending it, and that's where like the scale isn't coming from. Now it's time to think about, okay, how do we go about it next? So
Yeah.
to my point earlier, we think about it with statics first. How do you, like, if a brand is at that point, it's a client of yours, or if it's your own, how do you think about that? What do you
Statics is
use?
a great way to do it. I think what's really nice about AI recently is like you can take a bunch of B-roll footage as long as like it's not overly aggressive in that demo, and you can use AI voiceovers over the top of it and tell a different story. Like we're doing this for a brand right now where you start wide and then you go narrow. So here are the 5 things we can say. We can use AI voiceovers and a bunch of B-roll and just like remake the top. What's really nice is with it too is you could run it through. Here's a fun one. You could run it through Google AI Studio and have it transcribe the entire thing. Here's what's on the screen. Here's what they say. Here's the captions. Here's the format of the video. Here's what they show. Cool. Then you take that and you throw it into chat or Claude and you say, can you rewrite this for this demo? Now you need to give it a little bit more brand context and like what the demo cares about. And then have it do it for 5. Take that, throw it into 11 Labs. 11 Labs gives you a voiceover. Boom. Now, again, the visuals are where maybe it gets a little bit tricky depending on how specific the visuals are. But that's super low cost in a way to like extend, as you know, like statics can great way to test, super cheap to produce, but probably have a little bit of like upside scale limitation. So it might be hard to fully prove it out, especially if you need to like really explain the product. So that's another
Yep.
low cost way to do it.
Yep. No, I love that. I think I was going to ask you to name the tools, so thank you for doing that in advance because I'm sure everyone was curious on what you were talking about. Um,
Well, I
this
know a
is the
lot of
exact thing.
tools in our
Yeah.
industry. You know what I'm saying? I
Yeah.
know a lot of tools. So we can name
Just
some
looking at 3 of
tools
them.
on here.
Yeah,
I'm one
let's
of
run-
them. Yeah,
let's run the
here we
run the
are.
gambit. I think that I mean, we just did this for what it's worth. So with the sock business, which again, sorry to all the listeners that are like, I'm tired of you guys talking about this, but it's a brand that I'm public about and love like talking about because there's good examples. But we just launched for trades. This is one of these other cohorts that we've realized, hey, these customers are on their feet all day. They need really good socks. Great. So we're going after that. Exactly Brad's playbook that he just did is what we did. So it's like, okay, take our top ads that we know that work, run them through all of these AI models, which is a lot of heavy lifting that you wouldn't have to do, if you have a small team or you're a lean team or you're a founder just running your own ads. These tools are not that expensive to be able to utilize, like, less than hundreds of dollars a month that we spend on these tools. And just say, hey, go make me the same concept for a different persona. I think then the idea is like the biggest gap I find is that then a lot of brands either, if their agency can't produce enough creative, is just like finding a video editor that can basically take these like briefs that are written in GPT and do that. This is one resource. I don't know how you think about that. It's something that we're starting to try and figure out internally for ourselves as we try to crank up the volume of creative is like, okay, I need more editors and people because, AI hasn't gotten good enough that it can just like, here's a brief, go edit it for me. It's not quite there. Hopefully, hopefully it can get there sooner than later. But that's one thing that I feel like a lot of brands then struggle with is like, hey, I have all these ideas, but then the production part slows them down. So how do you think about that? Do you have any resources? Like, how are you thinking about from a volume standpoint of like, okay, I just did everything that Brad just said, his playbook. Now what?
You probably shouldn't be mad at your agency if they're like capped out on production because like you agreed to what they said. This is also bias coming from an agency, but like they have a predetermined scope. So if you need more from them, just go back to them and ask like, hey, how much are you doing? And like, how do we ramp it up? And you have to decide for yourself if that's cost effective or not. But like
I think that's
ramping up,
a very fair point. As another agency owner and a brand owner, I feel like that's kind of the sweet spot is like, yeah,
No,
this
I
is why I said in the
disagree.
beginning,
You
it's
should
like,
definitely like make a
yeah.
huge. You should
you know
like
what? Push
throw up
them,
a
burn
huge
them out.
fit, squeaky wheel, make your agency
Yeah.
make sure you get them mad. Then they'll really give
Yeah.
you a lot of shit.
Yeah. Then you're gonna
Yeah.
get high ROI. Anyways, keep going, Brad. Sorry.
if they're like capped or like you decide it's inefficient from a cost perspective to like pay them to do more, like you can just find a freelance video editor and like just you can go on Upwork or Fiverr or a million different places and like send out a bunch of legit test project, like take your brief, send it to them, see what they do, and then you can just kind of decide from there.
Yeah,
That's if you're not like if the bottleneck is actually the production and not the ideas, that's what I would do. If it's ideas, that's maybe something to dig into a little bit more.
yeah, I would say I completely agree and was going to make that point. I was talking to Leandro Cabrini, who's a member, and he runs Propel, which is like an outsourced Latin American talent agency. And I said, hey, like, what's the biggest position that you hire for? Have you been hiring for founder members? And he said, video editor. Like, and video and like just even like a person that can do video and can do static editing, essentially. Like that's the biggest one. So I completely agree with you. I think that that's a good differentiation, right? You're looking at there, maybe you do have an issue with that iteration and like the angles you should go on. And again, I think that's a function of your time. So I think one of those decisions that you have to make as a founder is, okay, where is the most high leverage thing that I can do in my business? And that individually of what that can mean. Personally, I feel like one of the highest places that an agency currently can add the highest leverage is like proper media buying and this by helping you through the process of creative diversity. And I'm not saying you should go hire an agency. You could do this on your own, but the point is that like, is that the highest leverage place for you to spend time? Now, if you're a founder that has creative chops and you have a creative background, this could be an easy thing for you. But a lot of folks don't, and so knowing kind of your strengths and where to go is a really important thing. So much of being a business owner, right, is like knowing just as much what you should do and versus what you shouldn't do. And I think we all need to pay a little bit more attention to that. All of us, agencies and brands, but I think that's a big differentiator and important point to
being on the brand side now. I can 100% validate that this is probably one of the biggest leverage points if you're an e-commerce business, is this alone. So this morning, I'm on calls with our manufacturer talking about delays, talking about product, talking about all this stuff. But at the end of the day, I mean, what does like every brand say if you're like intro call with an agency? If you can hit this CPA or if you can hit this ROAS, you can scale infinitely. So like at the end of the day, what gets that? Ad creative in your ad account is actually probably the biggest leverage point to get there. And as we've, as Meta has said, as we're talking about, what is the best way to do that, which is creative diversity. So I think like this is definitely something that most brand owners should be thinking about and taking time to say, hey, even if I'm a product person, even if I'm an ops person, even if I'm not, the marketer in the business, be thinking about this. Make sure your team, make sure your agency is like doing their best effort at this, because I think it can have the most impact. I mean, we're at a point right now with Hollow where inventory has been an issue as we've been scaling, as we've been growing, but we're getting to a point now where it's like the only thing that's going to allow us to scale is just more efficiency and more ad spend. So it's like, how do we do that? We go find more personas to sell to. We figure out what angles and pillars like are going to resonate with that persona, and we just spend more money into Meta. And this is like as a brand that's doing, millions per month in revenue. This is not, a small case. So I think it's relevant for companies, D2C companies of all sizes.
In order to get to that point, like in order to even get to that point to begin with, like how far, I don't know how comfortable you are with like specifics, but like how far did you ride the hunters angle? Like just to give people some kind of context.
Yeah, so I'm pretty wide open about Hollow for the most part. Yeah, I mean, we did like basically our first $1 million in revenue was mostly around that angle, was warm socks for hunters. I mean, we spent probably 20-30K testing different personas, and immediately the hunter one just like popped. So we're like all in on that. We did that for almost a year. That was like our first year was like $1 million. To get up to 8 million, which was like our next year, that's where we were like, okay, we can't just sell in Q4. We have to sell in other periods. So, we found this trade thing. Hey, trades workers love this product. It fits the same kind of like angles as what worked for hunters, but it can also work here. That got us to 8 million. And then last year was like, okay, we really need to sell this outside of Q4. Like hikers can use this, other personas can use this, runners can use this, marathon people can use this, cyclists can use this. I mean, that's where we really had to open it up and say, okay, if we can get on a daily basis $1,000 to $2,000 in spend for each one of these personas and kind of each one of these, like we call them cohorts internally, the scale becomes much easier to hit. It allows us to spend 20, 30, 40 grand a day on meta then when we're spending a couple grand per persona per cohort. And I think that that's where brands where they like feel like they hit a ceiling and they're like, hey, I can't scale anymore. There's probably a good chance that you could sell your product just in different positioning or to a different persona. You just need to like think about what those could be. And creative is the best way to like go about testing to see if they're even interested or if you can find like an angle that resonates. So that's kind of how we thought about it year over year.
It's really interesting because like not to spend any significant amount of time on this, but like you can really easily see how like that understanding that person also then like goes to new product development, right? Like, okay,
Totally.
this is good, but it's not great for this person. So like then you're expanding your TAM through product development, which is probably a whole nother discussion.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
That sounds like another great podcast.
Yeah, it's exactly what we're doing, right? Like we just launched this trade collection. Now we're launching, a trail collection, then a run collection. Like these are all things that are personas that we're unlocking that we're like, okay, now let's go make a product specifically for them because our customers like our general product. But like if I make a product for them, they build it for them and I can price it right, I can actually build even more of a larger like ecosystem. So yeah, I think a lot of brands, not only with ads can do that, but can start thinking product wise that way too.
Brad, thank you so much for all the knowledge. As always, if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to each of us. You can hit me up at andrew@foxwelldigital.com. I'll try to send along any written resources that were shared. Brad, appreciate you walking through the concept. Zach, as always, thanks for the knowledge. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Please review the podcast if you get the chance. We will definitely take those reviews, and we appreciate your help in helping us climb to the top of the charts.
Number one, coming for it.
Have a good one, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Later.